Now let me open up one of these sample projects that you'll be able to download, and it is going to be called Movie Title. If you open that up, you're going to see a comp with some 3D text, very similar to what I just created, but finished off in a render comp with some added effects like a vignette and grain, as well as optical flares from Video Copilot. If you don't have that plugin, it will not render, but you'll be able to see what it looks like here. And while that's previewing, I'm just going to show you what the final render looked like. There we go. So you can see that I had this gold bevel and sides, and if you look closely, there's actually more than one bevel. It's kind of hard to see because I have motion blur, which I'll show you how I did, but there are multiple bevels in this text, and I'll show you how I made that as well. But if I play it again, you can see that I just used a text animator to do that Z position animation as well as a little bit of a rotation. I had a camera just tilted downwards and moving backwards. That optical flare is flickering and it's existing in 3D space, so it looks a little more realistic. And then I added this little bit of a magenta light on the side just to give a very mood epic kind of lighting feel to this entire scene. So let's take a look at the After Effects project and I'll show you how I did this. First of all, I just want to show you how I did the motion blur. So that is under this effects adjustment layer. I use an effect called CC Force Motion Blur. This literally just analyzes whatever you apply it to. In this case, I'm using an adjustment layer, so everything below this in the comp, and it's analyzing the motion from one frame to the next and artificially blurring everything out. This does take a long time to render, but we have motion blur samples in the shutter angle just like we do in our comp settings. So I increased the samples to 16. Honestly, that probably could have been bumped up to probably 24. And I have my shutter angle set to 90 degrees. That works just fine, and it's a way to get around that Cinema 4D renderer not being able to calculate motion blur. Then I did that same trick of using the Gaussian blur and unsharp mask just to make it feel a little less digital, added in some noise for grain, and then optics compensation. This is just a lens distortion effect that kind of warps out the corners of my image a little bit. Now I want to point out something. I'm using blending modes in this comp, but the Cinema 4D renderer doesn't allow blending modes, right? Well, that is right. What I ended up doing was taking the title pre-comp, which is where the animation of that text happened using the Cinema 4D renderer, and I put that into another comp that uses the classic 3D renderer. That is one way to get around those limitations. You can bring your 3D geometry from a Cinema 4D composition into a classic 3D composition. And that way I can use these blending modes. You can add in masks and track mats, all of those things, exactly as you would using the regular renderer. Now, if you do open up this project file, I want to strongly encourage you to work not at full resolution. Drop this down to, say, quarter. And even that is going to take forever to render, so you might want to disable the effects. And you can work even faster if you check this box right here, Draft 3D. That's basically going to remove all of the lighting from the 3D objects, so it's going to render a lot faster. And this is how I recommend that you work when you're focusing on things like the animation of the text. Drop the quality down really far. Enable Draft 3D. You might even change this to Fast Draft so you don't have any influence from the environment or anything at all. And this is now rendering much quicker, and you can focus on the movement of your text and not be bogged down by how long it takes to render all those effects. If you switch to Draft 3D and Fast Draft, you could even leave this probably at full, and it won't take that long to render. Now quickly, let me show you how I made this text. You see that we have 3 different text layers. If I turn off the first 2, we have what I used for the face of the text, which is just the single color. Let me zoom in nice and close here, and I'll have to turn off my Fast Draft. We'll change this to maybe just the draft quality. And you can see that there is a bevel in there. But then I wanted a second bevel, so I added a duplicate of that text layer using the same animations as before, but that way I could customize a second bevel and change the colors without having to use any of those overrides. I just changed the bevel depth to be bigger so that it popped out of this text. And I made the extrusion depth less. If I switch to my top view and reposition this so we can see it clearly. So I made that second bevel just less extruded, and I pushed it in Z space back further so it was offset from the face of that text. Then I did the exact same thing. I duplicated it, I pushed out the bevel to have more depth, I lowered the extrusion, and I pushed it backwards. And all 3 of those together made for a really interesting looking 3D text layer. and that's what it looked like at full quality. This was using another one of those Studio HDR environment maps. And I have two different lights, and these are both parallel lights. So I didn't use any point lights here, just very direct lighting from each direction. Put that all together and you end up with this animation. So feel free to download that project file and poke around through it to see how I made it.